The dust-choked wind howled across the barren plains like a banshee's wail as Nora Blackwell collapsed against the weathered fence post, her once fine blue dress now a tattered reminder of the life she'd left behind. The year was 1873, and the drought that had ravaged the Kansas territory had stolen everything from her husband, her home, and finally, her pride. Her stomach growled fiercely, a painful reminder that she hadn't eaten in nearly 2 days. The last of her provisions had been stolen by bandits who'd taken pity only in the fact they hadn't taken her life along with her meager belongings. Nora looked toward the lonely cabin perched on the hillside ahead, smoke curling from its chimney like a beacon of hope in the gathering dusk. She hadn't wanted to beg. The very thought made her stomach twist with something worse than hunger. But desperation had driven her across 15 miles of punishing terrain with nothing but the clothes on her back and her wedding ring still clinging to her finger. As she approached the cabin, Nora rehearsed what she would say. She wouldn't ask for money or shelter, just bread, something to quiet the gnawing in her belly before she continued toward the mining town another day's journey away. There, perhaps, she could find work as a laundress or cook. The cabin door swung open before she could knock, and Nora found herself face to face with the most imposing man she had ever seen. Standing well over 6 feet tall with shoulders broad enough to fill the doorframe, he regarded her with piercing blue eyes beneath the brim of a worn Stetson. His face was deeply tanned and weathered, with a thick mustache the color of wheat and several days' worth of stubble along his jaw. "You look half dead, madam," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle for a man of his stature. Nora straightened her spine, determined to maintain what little dignity she had left. "Forgive the intrusion, sir. I'm only asking for bread if you can spare it. Nothing else. I'll be on my way directly." The cowboy studied her for a long moment, taking in her sunburned face, the tears in her dress, and the determination in her eyes despite her obvious exhaustion. "Name's Noah Reid," he said finally, "and I don't make a habit of sending starving women back into the wilderness with nothing but bread." Before Nora could protest, he stepped aside, gesturing for her to enter the cabin. "Take the cabin," he said with a nod. "It's yours now." Nora blinked in confusion. "Sir, I asked only for bread. I cannot accept. I'm heading to Dodge City tomorrow at first light," Noah interrupted. "Got a cattle drive waiting. Cabin would sit empty for months. Might as well have someone looking after it." His expression softened slightly. "Besides, looks like you need it more than I do." Nora's legs nearly gave out beneath her as the implications of his offer washed over her. A roof, walls, safety. "I have nothing to pay you with," she whispered, ashamed of the tears that threatened to spill onto her cheeks. Noah shook his head. "Didn't ask for payment." He stepped further into the cabin, leaving her little choice but to follow. "There's stew on the fire and bread cooling on the table. Eat. Rest. We'll talk more after you've got your strength back." The cabin was simple but well-maintained, with a sturdy table, 2 chairs, a cast-iron stove, and a narrow bed pushed against the far wall. A bookshelf held a surprising number of volumes, and various tools hung neatly from hooks along the walls. True to his word, a pot of fragrant stew bubbled over the fire, and a fresh loaf of bread sat on the table. Nora's stomach lurched painfully at the sight. "You baked this?" she asked, unable to imagine those large, calloused hands kneading dough. The corner of Noah's mouth twitched. "A man's got to eat, can't survive on jerky alone." He pulled out a chair for her. "Sit before you fall down." Nora didn't need to be told twice. The stew was simple rabbit with wild onions and potatoes, but it was the most delicious thing she had tasted in months. The bread was hearty and still warm, perfect for sopping up the rich broth. Noah sat across from her, sipping coffee and watching her eat with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. When she'd finally slowed down, he asked, "What brings a woman like you out here alone?" The question was direct, but his tone wasn't accusatory. Still, Nora hesitated. Her story wasn't one she enjoyed telling. "My husband, Thomas, brought us west from Philadelphia 3 years ago. He had dreams of building a cattle empire." She stared into her bowl. The drought came. The cattle died. Thomas started drinking. Then the influenza took him last winter. She swallowed hard. "I managed to hold on to our place until the bank foreclosed 2 weeks ago." Noah nodded slowly. "And now, I heard there's work in the mining towns. I can cook, clean, sew, anything to earn my keep." "Mining towns aren't kind to women on their own," Noah said bluntly. Nora lifted her chin. "I'm aware of the risks, Mr. Reid, but I have little choice." "Noah," he corrected. "And now you do have a choice. Stay here, at least until I return." "Why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "Why would you offer your home to a stranger?" Noah was silent for so long that Nora thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "I know what it's like to have nothing but the clothes on your back." He stood abruptly. "I'll sleep in the barn tonight. You take the bed. We both need rest if I'm leaving at dawn." Before Nora could protest, he grabbed a blanket from a trunk and headed for the door. "Bolt the door behind me," he instructed. "There's a rifle above the fireplace if you need it." With that, he was gone, leaving Nora alone in the suddenly quiet cabin. She did as he instructed, sliding the heavy wooden bolt into place before exploring her unexpected sanctuary more thoroughly. A small pantry revealed sacks of flour, sugar, coffee, and dried beans, humble provisions, but far more than she'd seen in months. A basin in the corner held clean water, and a piece of mirror hanging on the wall reflected her haggard appearance back at her. Nora grimaced at her reflection. Her auburn hair hung in tangled strands around her face, and dirt streaked her cheeks and forehead. Moving to the basin, she washed away the grime of the road, then combed her fingers through her hair until it hung in some semblance of order down her back. The bed, when she finally allowed herself to lie upon it, was firm but comfortable, the blankets clean and smelling faintly of pine and wood smoke. Despite her racing thoughts about the strange cowboy and his inexplicable generosity, exhaustion quickly pulled her into a deep, dreamless sleep. Dawn broke with the cabin bathed in golden light. Nora woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was until the events of the previous day came rushing back. She hurried to dress, embarrassed to have overslept when her benefactor would be departing. When she opened the cabin door, she found Noah already loading supplies onto a sturdy-looking dun horse. Another horse, a sleek black mare, stood saddled nearby. "Good morning," she called, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders against the morning chill. Noah turned, tipping his hat in greeting. "Hope you slept well." "Better than I have in months," Nora admitted. "Thank you. I've prepared some coffee if you'd like some before you go." Something that might have been surprise flickered across Noah's face before he nodded. "That'd be welcome." Inside, Noah sat at the table while Nora poured coffee into 2 tin cups. She'd also found eggs in the pantry and had scrambled them with some wild onions she'd spotted growing near the cabin. "You didn't need to cook," Noah said, though he ate with obvious appreciation. "It's the least I could do." Nora hesitated, then asked the question that had kept her awake for part of the night. "How long will you be gone?" 3 months, give or take. The drive to Dodge City takes about 6 weeks if the weather holds. Then there's business to attend to before heading back. Noah studied her over the rim of his cup. "That is, if you're planning to stay." Nora stared into her coffee. The offer still seemed too good to be true, Yet the alternative, continuing her journey to an uncertain and potentially dangerous future, seemed increasingly foolish. "If you're certain," she said slowly, "I would be grateful for the opportunity to stay. I can look after your home properly. Make repairs, tend a garden." Noah nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Garden would be good. Soil's decent if you can get water to it. There's a creek about a quarter-mile east that hasn't dried up yet." They spent the next hour with Noah showing Nora the workings of the cabin, how to operate the stove properly, where he kept tools for repairs, which floorboards creaked and might need attention. He showed her the small stable where he kept his horses and the chicken coop that housed 6 laying hens. "I've left plenty of provisions," he explained as they walked back toward the cabin. "Ammunition for the rifle is in the trunk at the foot of the bed. Nearest neighbor is the Johnsons, about 3 miles south. Good people. They'll help if you need it." "I'll manage," Nora assured him. The more she saw of the property, the more she appreciated how well maintained it was, especially for a bachelor's homestead. As Noah prepared for final departure, Nora found herself reluctant to see him go. He was a stranger, certainly, but also the first person to show her kindness in longer than she cared to remember. "Why are you really doing this?" she asked as he mounted his horse. "Truly." Noah adjusted his hat, squinting against the rising sun. "My sister was widowed young," he said after a moment. "No one helped her. She didn't make it through her first winter alone." His eyes, when they met hers, held a sorrow that matched her own. "Safe travels aren't guaranteed to anyone, Mrs. Blackwell. Least I can do is offer a temporary harbor." With that, he tipped his hat once more and turned his horse toward the east, the pack animal following dutifully behind. "Nora," she called after him. "If I'm to call you Noah, you should call me Nora." He raised a hand in acknowledgement without looking back, and Nora watched until he disappeared over the horizon, wondering if she'd made the right choice in trusting a man she barely knew. The first week passed in a flurry of activity as Nora took stock of her new temporary home. She cleaned every inch of the cabin, mended holes in the curtains, and began clearing ground for a garden. The physical labor was exhausting but satisfying, giving her purpose after months of uncertainty. She found Noah's journal tucked behind the books on his shelf and hesitated only briefly before opening it. If she was to care for his property, she reasoned, she should know more about him. The journal revealed a man of surprising depth, a self-taught reader who recorded observations about plants, animals, and weather patterns alongside occasional philosophical musings. One entry, dated 3 years earlier, caught her attention. "Buried Elizabeth today. 26 years too young to leave this world. Promised her I'd make something of this land. Don't know if I can keep that promise without her here." Nora closed the journal, feeling like an intruder. Elizabeth must have been his sister. The discovery softened something in her heart toward the taciturn cowboy who had given her shelter. As the weeks passed, Nora settled into a routine. She rose with the sun, tended the chickens, worked in her growing garden, and repaired what she could around the property. In the evenings, she read from Noah's collection of books by lamplight, volumes of poetry, practical guides to ranching, and dog-eared adventure novels. The Johnsons, as Noah had predicted, proved to be good neighbors. Martha Johnson, a robust woman with 4 young children, visited 2 weeks after Noah's departure, bringing a jar of preserved peaches and curious eyes. "So you're the woman Noah left in charge," she said, looking Nora up and down. "He didn't mention how pretty you were." Nora blushed. "It's not what you might think. Mr. Reid offered shelter when I had nowhere else to go, nothing more." Martha's eyebrows rose. "Noah's never invited anyone to stay at his place before, let alone a woman. Not since Elizabeth passed. You knew his sister." Nora asked, eager to learn more about her mysterious benefactor. Elizabeth wasn't his sister, Martha said, looking confused. She was his wife. The revelation stunned Nora. His wife. But he told me that she died young. That's true enough. Childbirth 3 years ago, lost the baby too. Martha shook her head sadly. Nearly destroyed him. He's kept to himself ever since, focused on building up his herd. First time I've seen him show interest in anything beyond cattle and that land of his. Nora's mind raced. Why had Noah lied about Elizabeth? And what did Martha mean about him showing interest? I believe you've misunderstood, Nora said carefully. Mr. Reid offered his cabin out of kindness, nothing more. He'll be returning in a few months and I'll be moving on. Martha gave her a knowing look but didn't argue. Well, you're welcome at our place anytime. My Robert could use help with reading lessons if you're inclined. Heard you were a city woman, figured you might have some learning. The offer of companionship was tempting. I'd be happy to help, Nora agreed. As Martha prepared to leave, she paused at the door. Noah's a good man, best I know. Just carries his hurts close to his chest is all. After Martha left, Nora couldn't stop thinking about Noah's deception. Why pretend Elizabeth was his sister? Perhaps it was too painful to speak of her as his wife. Or perhaps he worried Nora would read too much into his offer if she knew he was a widower. The summer heat intensified as June turned to July. Nora's garden flourished with daily watering from the creek, producing beans, squash, and tomatoes. She preserved what she could, imagining Noah's surprise when he returned to find his pantry stocked with home-canned vegetables. At night, when the cabin grew too warm for comfort, Nora would sit on the porch and watch the stars, wondering where Noah was and if his cattle drive had been successful. She found herself missing his quiet presence, though they'd spent barely a day in each other's company. You're being foolish, she told herself firmly. The man offered shelter, not his heart. Yet she couldn't deny that her thoughts turned to him often. She wondered about the life he'd had with Elizabeth, about the dreams they'd shared before tragedy struck. Had he loved his wife with the same quiet intensity he seemed to bring to everything else? August brought violent thunderstorms that tested the cabin's roof. Nora discovered leaks in 2 places and, remembering Noah's instructions, climbed onto the roof herself to repair the damaged shingles. She was balanced precariously near the chimney when hoofbeats approached. "What in God's name are you doing up there?" A familiar voice called. Nora nearly lost her footing in surprise. Noah sat atop his dun horse, staring up at her with an expression that mingled shock and something that might have been admiration. "Fixing your roof," she called back, her heart racing at the unexpected sight of him. "You're early." "Clearly," he said dryly, dismounting. "Come down from there before you break your neck." Nora carefully made her way down the ladder she'd propped against the cabin. When she reached the ground, she was acutely aware of her appearance, hair escaping its pins, dress smudged with dirt and tar from the roofing. Noah looked little better. His clothes were trail-worn, his face leaner than she remembered, with several weeks' worth of beard covering his jaw. But his eyes were warm as they took her in. "The drive went faster than expected," he explained. "Good weather, strong cattle, got a fair price in Dodge." He glanced around the property, noting the thriving garden and the fresh whitewash on the chicken coop. "Looks like you've been busy." "I wanted to earn my keep," Nora said, suddenly shy. "There's stew on the stove if you're hungry." A genuine smile broke across Noah's face, transforming his features. "A hot meal sounds like heaven after 3 months of trail cooking." Inside the cabin, Nora was hyper-aware of how different the space looked. She'd added wildflowers in mason jars, hung new curtains made from fabric Martha had given her, and rearranged the furniture to make better use of the space. "I hope you don't mind the changes," she said nervously as Noah looked around. It's never looked better, he said quietly. Elizabeth would have approved. Nora froze in the act of ladling stew into a bowl. Your wife had good taste then. Noah's head snapped up. How did you? Martha Johnson told me, Nora said, placing the bowl in front of him. She was quite surprised when I referred to Elizabeth as your sister. Noah's expression closed off. Martha talks too much. Why did you lie to me? Nora asked, sitting across from him. For a long moment, Noah stared into his stew. Finally, he sighed. Didn't want you thinking I had expectations. A widower offering his home to a young widow people would talk. Let them talk, Nora said with more boldness than she felt. We know the truth. Noah studied her face. And what is the truth, Nora? The question hung between them, laden with unspoken possibilities. Nora's heart pounded as she realized how much had changed in the months of his absence. She had come to care for this place, and if she was honest with herself, for the man who had created it. The truth is that you saved me when I asked only for bread, she said softly. And I've spent every day since trying to be worthy of that kindness. Noah reached across the table, his calloused fingers brushing against hers. You've more than earned your place here. This cabin hasn't felt like a home since Elizabeth died. Now it does. The admission hung in the air between them, neither willing to address its implications directly. Instead, they ate together as Noah recounted tales from the cattle drive and Nora shared stories of her gardening triumphs and disasters. As the evening deepened, Noah stood reluctantly. I should head to the barn. You take the bed. This is your home, Nora protested. I can sleep in the barn. Not while I'm alive, Noah said firmly. I'll be comfortable enough. But as he moved toward the door, Nora found herself speaking before she could reconsider. The cabin is big enough for both of us if we're careful about proprieties. She blushed deeply. I mean, I could make a pallet near the fire. You should have your bed back. Noah turned, his expression unreadable in the lamp's dim light. And what would Martha Johnson say about that arrangement? Martha Johnson is 3 miles away, Nora pointed out. And I'm a grown woman who can make her own decisions. A slow smile spread across Noah's face. That you are. He hesitated, then added, if you're sure. I am, Nora said firmly, though her pulse raced at her own boldness. That night, Nora lay on her pallet near the dying embers of the fire, listening to Noah's steady breathing from the bed across the room. Despite the impropriety of their arrangement, she felt safer than she had in years. Days turned into weeks as they settled into a new routine together. Noah worked from dawn until dusk, repairing fences, caring for his small herd of cattle, and preparing for winter. Nora continued her gardening, adding preserving and canning to her daily tasks as the harvest came in. They worked well together, their movements falling into a natural rhythm. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch, watching the sunset paint the prairie in gold and crimson. Sometimes they talked about books, about their pasts, about dreams for the future. Other times they sat in comfortable silence, content in each other's company. Nora learned that Noah had come west as a young man, working cattle drives until he'd saved enough to buy his own land. He'd met Elizabeth in Dodge City, where she'd been working as a schoolteacher. They'd built the cabin together, planning to raise a family and cattle in equal measure. She would have liked you, Noah said one evening as they shelled peas together at the table. Elizabeth believed in second chances. Is that what this is? Nora asked quietly. A second chance. Noah's hand stilled. I hope so, he said, his voice rough with emotion. For both of us. The first frost came early that year, forcing them to harvest the last of the garden in a hurry. They worked side by side, their breath forming clouds in the crisp morning air as they gathered squash, pumpkins, and the last of the green tomatoes. "These will ripen indoors," Nora explained as she carefully arranged the green tomatoes on the windowsill. "My mother taught me that trick." Noah watched her with a thoughtful expression. "You've brought life back to this place," he said suddenly. "I didn't realize how empty it was until you filled it." Nora turned to face him, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Noah, I don't want you to leave," he blurted out. "When winter's over, or ever if I'm being honest." The declaration hung between them, raw and vulnerable. Nora took a step toward him, then another, until she stood close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Are you asking me to stay?" she whispered. Noah reached out slowly, as if afraid she might flee, and touched her cheek with calloused fingers. "I'm asking for more than that," he admitted. "But I'll understand if it's too soon or if you don't feel." Nora silenced him by placing her hand over his. "I came here asking only for bread," she said softly. "You gave me a home instead. How could I not love you for that?" The word love seemed to hang in the air between them. Noah's eyes widened, and for a moment, Nora feared she had misread the situation entirely. Then his arms were around her, pulling her against his chest as his lips found hers in a kiss that spoke of longing, relief, and promise. Nora melted into his embrace, her hands finding their way to his shoulders, then his neck, then the short hair at the nape of his neck. When they finally parted, both breathless, Noah pressed his forehead against hers. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," he confessed. "After Elizabeth, I figured that part of me was gone for good." "I felt the same after Thomas," Nora admitted, "though what I felt for him pales in comparison to this." Noah drew back slightly, his expression serious. "I'm not a wealthy man, Nora. This land, the cattle, it's enough to live on, but never in luxury." Nora laughed softly. "I asked for bread, Noah, just bread. Luxury is the furthest thing from my mind." His answering smile was brilliant. "Then marry me," he said, the words tumbling out as if he couldn't hold them back any longer. "Stay here, not as my guest but as my wife. Help me make this cabin a true home again." Tears sprang to Nora's eyes as joy bloomed in her chest. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." They were married 2 weeks later by the circuit preacher who stopped through the area monthly. Martha Johnson hosted the small celebration at her farm, where neighbors from miles around gathered to witness the union of the solitary rancher and the woman who had arrived asking only for bread. As winter settled over the prairie, blanketing the land in pristine white, Nora and Noah found warmth in each other's arms and in the home they now truly shared. The cabin that had once felt like a temporary sanctuary to Nora now became the foundation for a new life, one built on kindness, respect, and a love that had grown from the simplest act of generosity. Spring brought new calves to the herd and new plans for expanding the garden. Summer saw the addition of a second room to the cabin, built by Noah with help from neighboring ranchers. And by the following autumn, Nora's belly had begun to swell with the promise of new life, a daughter they would name Elizabeth, in honor of the woman whose memory had shaped their beginning. "I never imagined this," Nora confessed one evening as they sat on the porch, her head resting on Noah's shoulder as they watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues. "When I knocked on your door that day, I thought I'd reached the end of my rope." Noah's arm tightened around her shoulders. "Instead, it was just the beginning." Nora smiled, placing her hand over his where it rested on her growing belly. "All because I asked for bread and you gave me a home instead." "Best decision I ever made," Noah murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple, "and I'd make it again in a heartbeat." As darkness fell over the prairie, the lights from their cabin windows glowed warm and welcoming, a beacon of hope in the wilderness, just as it had been for Nora on that desperate day long ago, when she had asked for nothing but bread and received, instead, everything her heart had ever wanted.